Okay, so being that took some extra time, I'll try to be fairly quick. Our special guest for tonight is Michael Munts. Mike is a wildlife biologist with the Little Pond Array National Wildlife Refuge. Mike's a longtime birder and also a longtime friend of Spokane Audubon. I believe this is his 5th time presenting in quite a few years, but anyway, we're happy to have him back. And tonight, Mike's going to be talking about the 10 species you might find, 10 finch species you might find on the Little Pond Array and in our region generally. So thank you so much, Mike. Much appreciated. And I'll turn the floor over to you.
All right, let's see if we can. You guys see in the PowerPoint okay now?
Yes.
All right. So, yeah. Gary's introduction. I'm the refuge biologist on the Little Pond Array National Wildlife Refuge, and I actually did not know the number myself. I guess it's 5 programs I've done for you guys over the last 8-9 years. So, but that doesn't necessarily mean everybody is familiar with the refuge. So I'll just take a couple of slides here and just give you a little bit of an introduction to the refuge. We're, first of all, at least refuge headquarters is about 15 miles southwest of Colville, or about 70 miles north of Spokane. And when I say Spokane, I mean basically the north side of Spokane. In fact, I think that the mileages on our the directions on our website start at the Y. So, but what most people think of is the refuge is here on this map, what we call the main unit, which is, the bulk of our acreage, as you can see here. But we do manage 4 satellite parcels that are actually pretty spread out from just north of Cusick on the Pond Array River in Pond Array County over to a little parcel we have just north of Tenasket on the Okanagan River. So it's fairly spread out. And many of you may know a lot of the refuge system in at least the contiguous 48 states was established for waterfowl, water birds, wetlands, lakes, those sorts of things, but we're not one of those types of refuges. The refuge was established by executive order of FDR in May of 1939. And it is primarily forested. In fact, if you look at go to our website, one of the first things it says about the refuge is that we are the only forested mountainous refuge in the contiguous 48 states. But our enabling documents state that it is to be a refuge and breeding grounds for migratory birds and other wildlife. So when we talk about migratory birds, we're not talking about ducks. We're talking about primarily forest birds of various sorts, woodpeckers, warblers, chickadees, finches, things of that sort. And of course, other wildlife. So I'm not sure if you guys have seen, I've got the Zoom kind of menu bar up here, so I'm not seeing my slide titles. I don't know if you guys are or not, but if you're not, there is actually something there, which really is just titles of the slides. Most of them will be pretty understandable without that, but finches, I don't mean to sound too off the wall here, but what are they? What are finches? So, well, I'm a scientist, so I have to look at. So I'm going to talk about some of the taxonomy. So they're animals, they're vertebrates, and they're birds. And they're passerines. So this is what a lot of people don't necessarily understand. What are passerines? I mean, we collectively refer to them as songbirds, but what does that mean? Well, it's the largest order of birds. And specifically, they're not technically songbirds, they're perching birds. And what that means is passerines have a unique foot structure that allows them to perch. So like this nuthatch right here has a tendon and muscle structure so that passerines can basically lock their feet, and so they can hold onto a branch without contracting muscles. So what that does is that enables passerines to basically sleep and not fall off a branch, for example. But also this bird, when it's perching, it's not expending energy. Whereas you take a hawk or an owl, for when it closes its talons, closes its foot around a branch, it's expending energy that whole time to hold on, because it's contracting its muscles to close its feet to hold on. Passerines don't have to do that. And depending on what authority you read, there's somewhere between 52, 5,300 and about 6,500 species worldwide. Those are divided up into 125 families. And specifically, we're looking at one of those families tonight, the Fringillidae, or popularly simply referred to as finches. Worldwide, there's 227 species. The ABA shows 67 species. And some of you may be thinking that's an awful lot of finches. There aren't that many finches in the US. That's true. But where that number comes from is most of the Hawaiian honeycreepers are in this family. And the ABA area, as most of you probably know, for the last several years, includes the Hawaiian Islands. So actually, most of our finches in the US are in Hawaii, at least in terms of species. So yeah, of that 67, North America has 16. The other 51 being Hawaii. And the Refuge, as Gary mentioned, has 10 species. But kind of what distinguishes finches from other passerines? They generally have fairly large bills for crushing seeds. And although some of these can be very specialized, crossbills and the Darwin's finches of the Galapagos. And so I'll ask you guys a question. If somebody knows, feel free to unmute themselves and pop up. The bird on this slide, does anybody know what that is?
Crossbill.
Yeah. This species is endemic to 3 counties in Idaho. So this is the Cassia crossbill, which was elevated to a full species just a few years ago. They are primarily seed feeders. Although most feed their young, their nestlings, on insects. Although in most species, and we'll talk about a couple of exceptions, adults only occasionally eat a few insects. They have 4 tridactyl toes. That means they have 3 toes forward and 1 pointed backward. And across the family worldwide, they have quite a variety of strategies they use to open seeds. Some, like these top two, are grosbeaks with these big, heavy, very powerful crushing seed bills. And the one there in the lower right, the yellow bird that looks kind of like a warbler, that is that's a Darwin's finch from the Galapagos. And then yet, of course, we have the crossbills that we already saw briefly. Almost all species build cup nests in trees, and most species use grass or other plant fibers to do that. Most, I mean, we'll talk about one exception, but most have light colored eggs with a varying amount of spots. So let's look at Washington. Now, there's 13 species statewide that are at least somewhat regularly occurring. Ten of those are known to occur on the wildlife refuge. Those are evening grosbeak, some of us were talking about before the program. Pine grosbeaks, gray crown rosy finch, house finch, Cassin's finch, common redpoll, red crossbill, white-winged crossbill, pine siskin, and American goldfinch. Of course, 3 Washington species are not known to occur on the refuge. Those are purple finch, lesser goldfinch, and hoary redpoll. So with that, let's take a look at our 10 species. And these are in, again, you know, I guess I'm a scientist, so I'm listing these in taxonomic order as they're listed on the AOU, or I guess now AOS checklist. And again, I'm a scientist, so I have to include these binomials too. So Cocothrostis vespertinus, I think is how you pronounce that. They're found really throughout the pine region of North America, at least the northern and western pine regions. You don't see them particularly in the southeast. So Canada and the Rockies, and also the Cascades to a lesser degree. They occur and breed pretty far north, but not quite as far north as either the pine grosbeak or the redpolls. Like I say, they breed in the northern conifer zone and the Rockies and Cascades. Interesting thing about this bird is, to me, is these what we call disjunct or isolated populations in the Sierra Madre of Mexico. They're eruptive and widespread in winter, as we can see from the Christmas bird count map. So even though they just breed in this kind of northern area and in the western mountains, they can turn up pretty much anywhere during winter. It's what we call a dimorphic species, which means it has 2 forms. So the males are very colorful. Females have a very similar pattern, but most of that bright yellow and some of the black is replaced by gray or at least very faded yellow. They have this very massive yellow beak. And I don't know if everybody knows this or if anybody knows this, but that word gross here, in English, we think of that, you know, as short for grotesque, ugly, distorted, something like that. In this case, it doesn't mean that. It actually it's pronounced gros, and it's French for large. So really, when that term grosbeak, all that really means is big beak or large beak, which these birds obviously do. So, and it's also a very powerful beak. Back in my academic days when I was in school, I did a fair amount of bird banding, and of all the birds that I've been bit or injured by, grosbeaks actually did the most damage and hurt by far the most. being bit by a evening grosbeak trying to take it out of a net.
Mhm.
And that includes several raptor species that I've dealt with. So I've been bit by merlins and I've been bit by grosbeaks, and I can tell you the grosbeaks hurt a lot more than the falcon did. But they are a flocking species and they're quite vocal, but there's some interesting aspects of their vocalizations that we'll get at to in a minute. They use conifers, but also mixed forests, which by that I mean forest that has a mix of conifer and hardwood or broadleaf trees, especially aspen. They are less tied to conifers than say pine grosbeaks, and they do regularly feed and frequently nest in aspen trees, especially. It's also a very long-lived species. I did a lot of research using the Birds of North America species accounts put out originally by the American Ornithological Union, and that project was largely picked up by Cornell, University of Cornell, and the Bird Laboratory of Ornithology. But they had in there documented wild grosbeak. This was a banded bird, lived at least 15 years and 3 months. And what we mean by at least that is the time interval in between it being banded and recaptured. Who knows how long it actually lived? But for songbirds, that's a pretty incredible lifespan. Your typical chickadee and robin is going to live to maybe 3 to 5. They eat actually a wide variety of seeds and fruits, and this is that exception to adults not eating insects that much. Insects are really heavy, or grosbeaks are really heavy insect eaters, especially spruce budworm. And in fact, some of the research has indicated that they actually prefer budworms when they're available to even seeds, which is for a finch is really unusual, at least an adult bird. And of course, they will feed on the ground, not just in trees. And as most of you know, when they're around, they readily come to feeders, especially for sunflower and black oil sunflower. Interestingly enough, they rarely sing. There's very few published descriptions or records of evening grosbeak song. And in fact, I found this interesting quote about them in that species account from Cornell. The author said, they often moving in large flocks, this boldly colored bird with a massive bill is difficult for observers to miss. Yet during the breeding season, however, the species is quite secretive. Courtship occurs without elaborate song or display. The secretiveness, together with a sparse, fertile nest placed high in a tree, makes it a difficult subject to study. As a result, comparatively little is known of the species' life history. And in fact, as I was researching this, there's really only a handful of nest records for this. As common as these and widespread as this finch is, there's really very few nests have ever been found, and nobody has really had a chance to measure things like incubation periods and nesting periods, and we just don't know what it is. They flock even in the nesting season. Very unusual for a songbird, or really almost any bird. And they are not known to defend territories. Again, very unusual for a passerine. And several of those sparse nest records found multiple nests in a single tree. One of the reports I read, they found 8 evening grosbeak nests in the top 20% of a large pine. Yeah, so they nest near the top of the trees. They have a very loosely woven cup, so it tends to disintegrate quickly, making it that much more harder to study. You can't even find old nests because they break up They're made out of small twigs, rootlets. They're the ones that have been found have all been lined with grass or lichen. They seem to have 3 to 4 spotted eggs. But like I said, there's little to no info available on either incubation or fledging periods. At the refuge, they can turn up pretty much anywhere. They are highly nomadic. Some years I won't see them at all. I can go 2 or 3 years between seeing grosbeaks. But then we get a year like last year where I see them practically every day for 6, 8, 9 months. So next, as we go down that list, is pine grosbeak. Very colorful bird. One of my all-time favorite birds. And my wife here is snickering because I say that about quite a few things, actually. So, Pinicola enucleator, something like that. I'm a scientist. I use these and I still struggle to pronounce several of them. But again, they're found throughout the northern and western pine regions of North America. So again, we're looking at Canada and the Rockies, Cascades, even getting down in some of the higher elevations of Utah and Colorado. What I thought was interesting about these is this, again, disjunct or kind of isolated population in the Yosemite area. Again, they're a fairly large finch. They are also, again, dimorphic or 2 forms. As we all know, the male is really bright red and gray body, white in the wings. Female has a very similar pattern, but again, all that red is replaced with kind of a pale yellowish green color. Still a very attractive bird in her own right, I think. So they are, in spite of their name, they're found in a wide range of conifers, although they are almost always found in association with conifers. And they breed both north and in elevation to the tree line. So they nest higher elevation than any other finch in the Western Hemisphere except for rosy finches. Like the evening grosbeak, they're a fairly long-lived species. Banded birds have exceeded 10 years. They are not migratory, but they do tend to move from high to low elevations in winter. And small flocks can wander around. Well, at least the Colville Christmas bird count, we usually get 1 or 2 of these turn up somewhere. Maybe sometimes a flock of 3 or 4 or 5, but rarely very many. And they can experience large-scale eruptions if cone crops in a given area fail. They feed on seeds, buds, and also fruit. And primarily, we use conifers as well as deciduous trees and shrubs for feeding. Again, foraging flocks persist throughout almost an entire year. They really only break up and become territorial during the actual nesting season. And in winter, we often see them flocking with the Bohemian waxwings. I know I've seen that on the Chihuahua Christmas count more than once. Watching a flock of Bohemians, and all of a sudden this pine grosbeak pops up in the middle of them. I don't know if anybody else has seen that, but unlike some of the finches we'll get to a little bit later, females are not known to sing, but males are highly vocal. In fact, females are highly vocal too. They just don't sing. They do call quite a bit in flocks. Males sing as opposed to the evenings. Males sing frequently throughout the breeding season, and are quite defensive of the territory, even if it's only for a few weeks to months. And that's mid-May, basically now through mid to late July. Like I said, they're highly territorial. They build a fairly large cup nest. And again, it's made of twigs. It's quite a bit stronger than a evening grosbeak nest. Then they line it with grass, lichen, conifer needles, kind of depending on what they have available. And they lay 3 to 4 spotted eggs. Which are incubated for about 14 days. Once they hatch, both the male and the female continue to feed them. Young are fed regurgitated mash, kind of this mush of partially digested seeds and insects. And they leave the nest at 2 weeks or a little more, and they fly 3 to 5 days later. On the Refuge, if you're looking for pine grosbeaks, breeding season, now through August, September, which is more than the breeding season, but it's the warm weather, go high. Look at places like Olson Peak, Cliff Ridge. In winter, go low, particularly the LPO River Valley, the Auto Tour, that stretch around the office is the best place to see pine grosbeaks, in my opinion, in winter, which is actually when I have seen most of them. I've only seen really a handful during the summer. So Great Crown Rosy Finch is next, and this is our first one which does not breed around here. This is strictly a winter visitor. It's also by far our rarest finch. Like I say, it is a non-breeder. Only occasional winter records on the Refuge. Although I've heard you can find these a little more regularly, say on Mount Spokane, but and I know I've seen them up at 49 degrees. They're up above Chihuahua in winter. Yeah, like the last ones I saw were up there. Some of those houses just to the north of there's a little cluster of houses just to the north of the ski area. And I've been up there on the Christmas bird count, and I've seen rosy finches on bird feeders up there. They breed in alpine and tundra regions of the western part of the country. And as you can see, they've got they really expand their range out during winter. Their wings and belly are this really nice deep pink color. Browns and sides, or they have brown sides and breasts. And of course, the gray top of the head, which gives them their name. And that can vary quite a bit. So for example, birds in the Rockies and the Cascades tend to be fairly pale, whereas birds in Alaska and northern Canada are much, much darker. Diet is mostly seeds. Again, they will eat occasionally insects. They certainly eat more insects in summer. They have very remote nests. And like the evening grosbeak, very few have been found that breeding behavior not well documented at all. Those that have been found have been grass cups on the ground or in a cliff. It is rosy finches are the only ground nesting finches in the Western Hemisphere. There are really only a few records at LPO. Those that we have recorded have been during particularly harsh winters. And generally we've seen them in open areas. The river valley, especially in some of the old fields. Now going from our rarest finch to one of the most common. Many of you have been birding long, you may know this. These is formerly being in the genus Carpodacus, which is now considered to be only a European genus. They're a widespread species and getting wider. So they have kind of an odd range pattern here that we'll talk about. They were unknown in the east of the Rockies prior to 1939, when about 20 birds were Some debate whether they were released or they escaped from a pet shop in New York City. And all of the birds east of the Mississippi and east of the plains, as far as we know, are descended from those escaped pet shop birds. Although there's very likely some movement across the plains now. And even in the West, they have been expanding. The first record east of the Continental Divide and west of the Mississippi was not until 1955. And now they're, quite common in eastern Montana and Black Hills region of South Dakota, for example. The first Canada record outside of BC was only in 1976. The first Alaska record was 1986. And the first record in Anchorage was in 2005. So they have undergone significant range expansion and really still are, as they're continuing to move into Alaska. I suspect the next version of this map that Cornell does is going to include Alaska. This may likely be in response to climate change, but also probably other habitat changes that we've done over the last 50 years or so. Again, males and females look quite different. We all know the brightly colored males. In fact, one way you tell these from some of the other finches is this bright red, usually red rump. But the color on the male, it can be yellow, it can be red, orange. I've seen ones that you'd almost call deep maroon. It's highly variable. And from what I've read in the scientific literature, this seems to be diet dependent rather than genetic. And the females are much more of a drab brown. Almost no markings really on the face and head, which will be significant when we talk about the next species. Both have a streaked breast, although it's certainly more subdued on the male. Again, unusual for passerines. Both males and females are territorial. Both males and females sing, for example. They build a cup nest, as you can see here, almost entirely out of grass. They lay 4 eggs with just a few spots. Like a lot of the others we've talked about, nestlings are fed predominantly on insects. They're fed by both parents. The adults will really only occasionally will take bugs. The best place to see an LPO is the river valley, especially around headquarters. If we had bird feeders out, which we generally don't in the summer, but I know they just pulled those in not too long ago. That's certainly a place to see them, but you can certainly see and hear house finches around the headquarters and really the whole auto tour route generally. The Cusick unit, that satellite parcel over on the Pend Oreille River, a lot of house finches back in, especially in the wooded section of that unit. Which brings us to Cassin's finch. Again, formerly in the genus Carpodacus. Unlike what the house finch is becoming, this is still exclusively a Western species, primarily Rockies, at least East Cascades and Sierras. In the West, it's largely replaced by the purple finch. In a lot of ways, it's very similar to the house finch, but it is primarily Rocky Mountains. Unlike the house finch, Cassins are much more highly tied to conifers. And males, again, very brightly colored. They're pretty much always red. I've seen very little, I've never seen a yellow Cassin's finch or anything like that. It's not to say it isn't possible, but females are drab brown, but you notice this face pattern on the female. That is the best way to distinguish Cassin's finches and house finches. And at least here around Colville, we can see both most any time of the year. Unlike the house finch, only the female has a streaked breast. underside of the male cassins is very little markings. It's just color pattern that we're looking for. Like the house finch, both males and females are territorial, and they both sing. Interesting thing with these birds is I've read a few behavioral studies on these, and when you have territorial incursions, males only chase out males and females only chase out females. So males seem to almost welcome additional females into their territory, probably hoping for a little polygamy, which we think is probably what is driving the behaviors of females to be territorial. Although the females do sing, the song does tend to be in cassins to be a little less complex, a little less frequent. In house finches, they're very similar. In fact, I really can't have a hard time telling the difference between male and female songs in house finches. Again, cup nest, but unlike house finches, which are a lot more versatile, cassins finches almost always breed in conifers, typically on a lateral branch in the top third or so of the tree. They make a little more durable nest. They use twigs and roots. It's in line with lichens and grass. Average 4 eggs. And, like a lot of the others, most of the finches, nestlings are fed by regurgitation. They're fed by both parents, and diet includes buds, insects, budworms, tussock moths. That is the nestlings. Again, adults really only take occasional insects from as near as we can, or based on our best knowledge at this point. So at LPO, look for these at kind of mid to high elevations, particularly the upper portion of Blacktail Mountain Road, which is 13 miles long. Probably the upper 5 miles of that, cassins finches are pretty common, pretty abundant. When I do bird surveys up there in June, every stop has cassins finches singing on that upper probably 4 miles or so of the Blacktail Mountain Road. It is a little rough, so if you do go up there, I would encourage you to have a high clearance vehicle. It's not our auto tour, small Honda Subaru type car road. So, and then our other winter visitor is the red poles. Very beautiful little birds. Again, one of my 100 or so top favorite birds. Again, my wife is snickering as I say that in the background. Acanthus flammea, or basically flame colored. Again, these are not breeders in our area, but we do see them most years. This last year we didn't have winter, so I never actually saw either red poles or tree sparrows on the refuge, but I never really saw snow either. So again, so you can see from this map, this is they're primarily northern breeders, even up into Greenland, but they certainly range down into our area in winter, at least normally. So this is boreal forest birds, Arctic tundra, but it does winter into the northern U.S. It is one of our smaller finches. They're very light colored with brown streaks. And the name red pole refers to this red cap. This is a red pole. Male typically has some pink in the breast, though that can vary quite a bit. In breeding season, they're in open woodlands, birch, pine, spruce, alder, willow, In winter, I typically see them in birch, alder, willow, to some degree pine, so very similar. Although tree line in the Yukon or Alaska is very different species of birch and spruce, willows and things. It's still what they seek out in winter. And they can be rather suburban, if particularly if there's a lot of ornamental birches in the area. I know when I lived in Sandpoint, Idaho, they were regular feeder visitors in winter. Diet is predominantly seeds and flowers and catkins from especially birch, willow, and alder. Nestlings, again, are fed almost exclusively insects. And like I say, they where their habitat overlaps, they do readily come to feeders. You notice this egg is a little, like compared to the others I've shown you, is the spots are kind of a reddish color, and it's a little more pointed yeah, it's just not as round as some of the other eggs that are a little more traditional egg shape. But there's not a lot of info on nesting, but the nests that have been found, again, twigs, grass, lichens. They line them with feathers, 4 to 6 eggs, which are spotted, but not necessarily the typical dark black brown colors that we've seen on the others. On the Refuge, like I said, most of our records are from the river in the willow alder stands. And I looked this up the other day. Pretty much all of our records are from November to about the first 8-9 days of March. And when we do see them, they're typically around only a week or so. Red crossbills. This basically means curved nose, if you're wondering. Again, northern pine region, but even into the West Coast, a lot more widespread range in the Rockies and the Sierra Madre. And you can see they're actually getting their down into Belize. But in our area, Canada, Rockies, Cascades, they are eruptive and widespread in winter. I mean, look at this breeding year-round map or breeding season map compared to the Christmas bird count map. Of course, their name is for that unique bill shape. Crossbills are the most specialized of finches. Again, they are a dimorphic or two-formed species. Males are red, as we all know, are red with black wings. Females have a similar pattern, but all that red is largely replaced with a yellowish green color and more prominent gray in the face. They are a very complicated species, actually, as some of you know. There's 15 recognized subspecies. Sometimes they're referred to as call types. I know some crossbill experts like Craig Bankman at the University of Wyoming thinks most of these probably are should be considered full species. In each of these call types, they vary in the bill size and even the shape. Whether the bill curves to the top bill curves to the right or to the left is unique to within that call type. So like call type 7, the bill always curves the same direction. And call type 4, it may curve the opposite direction, but it always within that group curves in the same direction. And they're most commonly referred to as call types. But they are also sometimes referred to as subspecies. And I'm seeing a little bit more lately of them, some of those being referred to as like ponderosa pine crossbills or Douglas fir crossbills or lodgepole pine crossbills, because the various call types or subspecies do tend to specialize in a particular conifer species. And which is why that bill size and even to some degree the shape is is unique between the species because they're adapted to a particular type of pine cone. And two of those have been recently, over the last 5 or 6 years, recognized as full species. I mentioned the Cassia crossbill. This picture here, this is actually the other one. This is the Scottish crossbill. It was just separated out about 3 years ago, I think. And it is endemic to not just Scotland, but the island of Britain. So it's not just Great Britain, but just the one island that makes up England, Scotland, Wales. You don't see them in any of the surrounding islands. Most forms of crossbills are very vocal, highly vocal in flight. That's the way we usually find crossbills, is with flight calls. Both calls and songs vary quite a bit between call types. Some birders that are better than me can fairly regularly distinguish these. That, you know, I've been out with some guys that are, like I say, a lot better than me, and crossbills fly over, and oh, that's call type 13. Oh, that one over there, that's call type 4. I can tell they're different, but I'm not that good. They are unique. Crossbills are unique among passerines in that they feed almost exclusively on seeds year round. Very few insects, and even the young are fed only occasional insects. Other than crossbills, the only other bird I'm aware of that does that are nutcrackers. I'd say that's pretty unusual. Now, another very unusual aspect of crossbills is that they will nest year round. Nesting is triggered not by temperature, climate, snow conditions, etc., but by food availability, which is why, to me, these are such cool birds, because when I was in Idaho, I several times saw red crossbills feeding newly fledged birds in the middle of January at 25 to 30 degrees below zero. And they're nesting, 4 feet of snow on the ground, 25 below zero, and crossbills are nesting because there was a good cone crop last fall. That's an impressive bird that can keep eggs at 105 degrees in those conditions. They maintain flocks even when nesting. Nests are a little more durable than some of the others. They make them out of twigs, lined with lichen, mammal hair, needles, feathers, etc. Those sturdy nests are, I don't know this, I haven't necessarily read this, but I suspect that that's an adaptation to some of the harsh weather conditions that they sometimes nest in. Again, I saw some there when I was at Craters of the Moon. I saw some winter storms that were just horrific. I mean, we would see 50-mile-per-hour winds and 30-foot drifts and 20, 30 plus degrees below zero, and crossbills are nesting in that stuff. Eggs are, like a lot of the others, pale with spots. Incubation is about 2 weeks. So I went back and looked at my notes. Those at least one of those sets of crossbills I saw feeding young. I figured they laid their eggs right about Christmas in sub-zero temperatures. Young are fed almost exclusively regurgitated seeds. Now here's one of the cool aspects of them. Crossbill nestlings are able to enter torpor and drop their body temperature when a female needs to leave the nest to feed or to defecate or whatever she needs to do when she leaves. Because again, if you're below zero and you got a bunch of 3 or 4 nestlings in that nest and the female needs to go defecate, they get cold fast and they actually will go limp and they'll drop their body temperature and basically hibernate for a few minutes. Pretty impressive birds. At LPO, we can find them pretty much everywhere. They are frequently seen on the roads along the auto tour picking up grit, but listen for flight calls. While we're on crossbills, and since this is Audubon, I had to throw in at least one Audubon painting. They breed in, again, even farther north than the reds in the Rockies, Cascades. So you can see this is a little bit more of a northern species, but they do come down the Rockies and the Cascades into our area. And again, these kind of isolated pockets in Colorado. And like I said so many times with finches, they are nomadic, they are eruptive. If the cone crops fails, they will move hundreds of miles looking for food. Unlike red crossbills, white wings are highly specialized. They pretty much only use spruce. Like the red, it is dimorphic with the bright red male and the female sharing that pattern, but going to more of a yellowish green color. Flight calls can be heard year-round, even in nesting season. Only the male sings, and they're quite vocal during the breeding season, both males and females. A lot of chatter going on. Again, they're still flocking. And males will typically sing they'll find the tallest tree and go to the very top point of that and just belt it out. They feed almost predominantly on spruce. They will eat other conifer seeds, but some of the food habit stuff I've seen published, their diet is 90+% spruce of the various species. Of course, around here, that's Engelmann spruce in the higher elevations. As you get up more towards in that boreal zone, there's black spruce, white spruce, and some others. Young, again, are fed almost exclusively seeds. Like I said, they maintain flocks like the red crossbills. They will nest at any time of the year. It all depends on food availability. And like they're feeding, most nests that have been found have been in spruce trees. And similar to a lot of the others, twigs, grass. Interesting one on this one, they use a lot of birch bark in their nests, which is then lined with lichen, mammal hair, needles, feathers. Another interesting thing I found about these is that nests built during the winter are 25 to 30% larger on average than summertime nests. Again, I suspect that's just a buffer against the weather. 3 to 5 pale blue eggs with spots. And I couldn't find any egg pictures. So again, they hatch in 2 weeks, fledge in vicinity of 3 weeks. Where to find at LPO? Again, they can turn up almost everywhere, anywhere. They're nowhere near as common. I only encounter white wings every couple of years. But most sightings have been in spring or in summer at the higher elevations, basically at the places where we have Engelmann spruce. So pine siskin, Spinus pinus. Again, those of you who have may have paid attention to these binomials over time, these are formerly in the genus Cardulus. It is unlike some of the others we just talked about, this is a very widespread species. Really throughout, again, that northern conifer zone of North America, but also much of the West and well into Mexico. And again, these are eruptive and basically Christmas bird count data pretty much everywhere. It's a small brown finch with yellow in the wings and the tail. That yellow flash is just so distinctive when you see them fly. They, in spite of their name, they do use deciduous. Back here at my house, I see them in the big old Norway maple trees quite a bit. They're seed eater pine, but also other seeds. They're particularly fond of alders and birches. They will readily use feeders, as hence the problem with salmonella. These are very vocal birds. Flocks are often found by the interflock chatter. Females don't sing, and the song itself is really only heard during the breeding season, but these flocking calls, contact calls, are almost nonstop. The one exception is when they're nesting. They pretty much go dead quiet when they're in the vicinity of the nest. When they're out feeding, they're chatter, 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 but they start approaching the nest and it's like run silent, run deep. And they tend to nest in kind of loose colonies. Mating and nest building is March to June. Dates will vary with altitude. You know, kind of a broken record, but you know, that's unique to the common in the family, cup nests. These we know are often on the lateral branch in a dense part of the tree. They use quite a wide variety of materials, twigs and grass and leaves and various plant parts. Little different here is you see a lot of siskin nests that incorporate bark, especially cedar bark. You know, cup is 3.5 to 3 3/4 inches, 3 to 4 eggs, pale blue with spots. Incubation, a couple of weeks, and a lot of the same feeding strategies. Younger fed insects, but also they feed a lot of seeds. Siskins are heavy predators of assorted aphids. So if you have aphids in your garden, hope for siskins. Young fledge at around 13 days, they're independent in 3 weeks. What we haven't seen in many of the finches yet is siskins will nest a second time round in late June or July. See it at LPO. Look for the mixed forest zone, conifer deciduous area. These aspen clones in the middle of a larger pine or fir forest is where we see a lot of siskins on the refuge. We also see them a lot along the river in where they're zipping back and forth out of the pine forest down to the willows and the alders to feed on seeds. And like I said, especially along Bear Creek too, drainage as well. Brings us to our last one, Spinus tristis. It's widespread throughout US and southern Canada. This is one of probably the largest range map we've seen so far. And it is our state bird. And so you may or may not know, but this was decided by, it was actually a statewide vote of elementary school children in 1951 that selected this. So does anybody know what the actual name on that ballot and what the name of the bird was that was actually designated our state bird back in 51? If anybody knows, wants to speak up, feel free to unmute yourself and say so. But
Wild canary.
Yeah, second the motion.
actually, it was willow goldfinch.
Oh, the willow. Huh.
There are 4 subspecies of American goldfinch. They were all, prior to the 1960s, there was considered to be 4 species of goldfinches. The eastern goldfinch, Spinus tristis, now tristis, was originally published by Carl Linnaeus in Systema Nature in 1754. Some of you may know that this is the document that established our modern taxonomy of kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So this was in the what is now the eastern goldfinch. At that time, it's simply called goldfinch. It was one of the first birds in the Western Hemisphere to actually get a published description of. And that goes back to the 1750s. And Carl Linnaeus himself. Like I say, there are 4 subspecies. Eastern goldfinch is east of the Rockies. Pale goldfinch is Rockies to the Cascades and also ranges throughout much of southern Canada. And then we have the northwestern goldfinch in the Cascades, and the aforementioned willow goldfinch is more coastal. So the birds we see here are likely a mix of the pale and the northwestern goldfinches. Yeah, and other than the red crossbill, they're the only finch in North America that actually has named subspecies or distinctive subgroups like that. Like most of the finches, they are dimorphic, or 2 colors. I mean, this is a well-known bird to everybody, so I don't even have to tell you what they look like. But the bright male on the right and the more pale, bleached out female on the left. It is the only North American finch species and one of very few songbirds in the Americas to undergo 2 complete molts. So you have the summer or breeding colors here, and then you have the wintering male right here. So most songbirds only molt all of their feathers once a year. American goldfinches do it twice. And non-breeding males resembling females. They typically use more open habitat than the closely related siskins. They are often found near forest edge, but often out into the open areas. Again, they're seed eaters. They form foraging flocks year round. Cup nests, little different structure than most. It's made almost entirely out of grass and spider webs. And it's typically located in some of the densest vegetation that they can find. 4 to 5 pale blue white eggs. You notice in this museum picture here, they are the only finch in the Americas that does not have spotted eggs, which I thought was interesting. Again, they hatch in about 2 weeks or a little less. They fledge in a couple more weeks. The parents feed them for another 2 weeks after that before they are independent. Some other interesting or unusual aspects of the goldfinches is the young of the year generally do not migrate. In fact, they will often join with winter foraging flocks of siskins. Migration is certainly well known in adults, but it isn't well documented in terms of where they go, what their migratory pathways are. Still a lot we need to learn about these birds. And like I said, pretty much all the breeding age birds go south for the winter. A few banding reports suggest that our birds probably winter in Southern California. Whether all of them do or not, at least some of them. And of course, on the refuge, the river, the woods around headquarters are really good places to see goldfinches. And also see a lot of them breeding on the Kinixu unit. That is our 780 acre parcel on Deer Lake. So, and that's pretty much it for my presentation. But if you would like more information on the refuge, certainly check out our webpage. And also we have a very active friends group, which also has a webpage, refugefriends.com. And feel free to check out either of those or call. Certainly feel free to call us at the office, email. We're more than happy to talk to you about finches, birds, or anything else pertaining to the refuge. I would also like to thank a lot of my image sources. There's certainly some of my own pictures in here, but a lot of pictures came from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and their media library, Wikimedia Commons, and also a lot of them came from an educational slide set I bought about 15 years ago. And I don't think they even do it anymore, but from Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Put those out in the late 90s into the 2000s. So with that, I'm pretty much done. And I'll leave you with the last Washington finch I have not shown a picture of yet, the purple finch. And if there's any questions, you can certainly do that for as late as you guys want to stay on, I guess.
There was one question in chat. Why are pine siskins prone to salmonella?
Because they are in fairly large flocks and they're really messy birds. If you have bird feeders and bird baths, you notice that siskins poop in the bird bath. They poop on their own feeders. And that's where the salmonella is. It's in the feces. So it's really one of the primary ways of spreading is contaminated water. They get in these big flocks. They like I say, they poop in the bird bath, and then another bird comes along and drinks that. And that, or simply just physical contact. But if any of you have fed birds and had a lot of siskins, you notice, yeah, there's a lot of whitewash on your feeders, and that's how it spreads. So that's why DFW recommended we take down our feeders. They're trying to get the siskins to disperse to where they're not in such tight feeding flocks, with 25, 30, 40 birds on a feeder at the same time.
Hey, Mike, can you tell us a little bit more about that more local species of crossbill?
The cassia in Idaho, or?
Yes.
Yeah, it's actually in southern Idaho, in the mountains south of Twin Falls. Actually not too far from where I worked before I came here 10 years ago. But then there's, it's in a very unique situation. It's called the Albion Mountains. It's mostly part of the Sawtooth National Forest, a kind of a separate ranger district. They're south of Twin Falls and Burley. And so it's part of the Basin and Range Mountains. So you have these forest islands that are surrounded by, you may have heard the term sagebrush sea. So there's a lot of opportunity for isolation. And typically the theory goes something like this. Red squirrels have not been in the Albion Mountains since the Ice Age. So without red squirrels, the lodgepole pine there have produced unique cones. Very few serotinous cones and absolutely huge cones for lodgepole pine. The lodgepole pine cones in the Albions are 50% to twice as large as lodgepole pine in neighboring mountains. And so over time, like I said, you haven't had the seed predator, the red squirrel, driving the development of the lodgepole pine. And then as Craig Bankman at University of Washington, or University of Wyoming, I've heard him describe it as an arms race between the pine and the bird. But the bird pressure is not nowhere near as heavy as the red squirrel. So red squirrel, when they eat a cone, they pretty much eat everything. Crossbills are messy. And messy feeders, which means they're dropping a lot of seeds, which means they're planting a lot of seeds. So as the pine cones got bigger, the crossbills got bigger, and they reach this equilibrium where the crossbills are able to get enough seeds out to feed themselves, but at the same time, they're dispersing and planting enough seeds that the lodgepole is is propagating. And so they've kind of reached an equilibrium where they're helping each other. Kind of like if you're familiar with the situation between like white bark and limber pines and Clark's nutcrackers. But that was all driven because of this tree island without squirrels is the theory.
Fascinating.
And which is why it has such a small range of only about 3 counties in southern Idaho. It has one of the smallest ranges of any non-island bird in the world.
In a sense, it is an island bird.
Yeah, but it's not an oceanic island.
Yeah.
So, I mean, similar to the forces which have driven so much diversity in the Finches and the Galapagos Islands, really is what it is.
Mhm. Fascinating.
Because if you remember that picture that I showed of the Cassia crossbill, his head and bill were just huge.
Right.
And the other great thing about them is they're easy to find. They frequent a couple of Forest Service campgrounds. And so if you ask a lot of local birders, they say, you know, hey, go to the, and I can't, it's been 10 years since I've been there. I can't remember the names of them now, but there's a couple of, like I say, Forest Service campgrounds where they're just, where they're regular nesters, and they're not, and unlike most crossbills, they're not eruptive, they're not migratory, they're really not even nomadic. Craig told me once that he's had banded birds not move more than a mile in their entire lives. Which for finches is just crazy.
So is that west or east in southern Idaho?
It's right about in the middle. So, and I don't remember exactly, but it's roughly equidistant between Oregon and Wyoming.
Okay.
So, and just north of that tri-state point of Idaho, Utah, and Nevada.
Good stuff, Mike. I don't see any other questions on the chat, so I guess we can call it. But it's always a pleasure to have you. Your insights are impressive, even on birds that we tend to think of as fairly common. I always learn something. So
Yeah.
thank you.
And if you guys like these kind of species group profile programs, I know the ones I did on owls and woodpeckers were pretty popular. So, you know, I certainly wouldn't be above doing another one next year if you guys continue to like this. But,
Certainly.
so
Very good. Very good.
I'm thinking if I do it again, maybe something like chickadees and nuthatches or something.
Mhm.
That's a group of common birds, which has some interesting behaviors and biological things that a lot of people don't know about. Like chickadees are territorial in the winter. Most people don't know that. Both blackcaps and mountains defend territories and defend food sources in winter.
Huh.
And they have a lot of site fidelity. So if you have chickadees on your bird feeder, chances are that it was the exact same chickadees last year and will be the exact same chickadees next year, at least for their 4 or 5 year lifespan.
Mhm.
So
Great stuff. Okay, if any, does anybody else have a question? Otherwise, I guess we'll call it an evening. Okay. Well, again, thank you so much, Mike.